This morning I woke up my usual time about 6 o'clock, and I was like, wow, today's Friday. It's almost Christmas holiday, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I have this big presentation to give. And I was like, oh, maybe I should just lay in bed and just like rest, right? Because I've tried to talk myself out of getting up. And I was like, oh, it's such a busy day and I want to be fresh and rested. And maybe I'll just skip my workout today and I'll just, lay in bed. And my wife said, "Are you getting up?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sometime, sometime I'm getting up." And she's like, "How come you're not going out to our shop to do your workout?" And I was like, "Oh, because I just need to be rested." And she's like, "Are you crazy?" She's like, "You do workouts every single day, and today is a big day for you, and you're going to skip that?" And she's like, "Look at this. It says here that Chuck Norris's birthday was sometime in the past little while, and he's 85. And today he posted a selfie of him at the gym. And here's all these Chuck Norris jokes that she just starts like reading from her phone, right? And I was like, "Are you joking?" And the best one was when Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone. He had already missed 3 calls from Chuck Norris, and I was like, "Oh, that's it. I'm going out to the gym, man. I'm just gonna nail this." And so, that's kind of how my day started. It started just an interesting day and a motivational day of getting out there, getting my workout in and preparing for this seminar today. And I was really excited to see so many of you take the time to show up and to be present today. Um, we do these things, right, in our life. We think about our routines. We think about who we are. We think about the things that make us who we are. And really, today's topic is that finding meaning after religious hurt. And basically, what I mean by that is finding meaning after our systems have collapsed. My system tried to collapse. My physical system tried to collapse this morning, but I was motivated to get out there. But I want to show you some stuff on my desk here, and this is kind of a fun thing, I think, for Zoom. When I decided that we were going, we're doing this Zoom, right? And I was like, oh man, technology and we don't get along too well. But uh, I decided to wear my Ghostbuster socks this morning. And if you don't believe me, I really do have Ghostbuster socks. This is the sock with the overalls, right? The Ghostbuster overalls. This is a sock with Slimer. Can you see Slimer there? And he's being trapped in there. And then the pair I have on um, is just a general Ghostbuster pair. And I do this to ward off all the little gremlins that can come into our into our technology. And so that's just part of who I am. I love wearing fun socks, and that's a part of me. Something else on my desk that I thought was fun to share. This sits kind of by me. This is a deck of playing cards that my grandfather and I actually played with when he was still alive. Some 30 plus years ago, we'd play poker with this deck of cards, and when he died, my mom said, "What would you like from Grandpa?" I said, "I want that deck of cards." And so this sits on my shelf every day, and I get to look at this deck of cards. And then another thing that sits on my desk is this piece of pottery. We have a pottery studio, and my wife and I, we create pottery and we teach some classes and things. But it has a big chip in it, right? I don't know if you can see this big chip. It still sits on my desk, and that chip is very important. It reminds me of some things that we need to look at today. And then finally, I have this coaster, these things that a friend sent me to set my hot drinks on or cold drinks, and it's the constellation of all the stars. And if you know a bit about my work, I focus a lot on dark skies, and so she sent this special thing to me. All these things on my desk, they have very little monetary value, right? I mean, the deck of cards probably like $1 or two. These coasters probably weren't that expensive. The socks were cheap, right? But all of these things create who I am. They bring great awareness to who I am and to my story. And I think as you look around your room today, around your space, you will find things like that. You will find things that really create space. Um, they aren't they're these are not awards, they're not credentials, and they're not things I display to impress people, but they all hold story, and they all hold our identity, and they hold, for me, the things that I shared with you. They have a place of awe. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And Aaron and I practiced this already, and we'll see if the Ghostbuster socks are going to work. Okay. And we'll look for Aaron. Aaron, thumbs up if you can see it. Yay, very good. Okay, so far the Ghostbuster socks are working. Uh, when I was teaching fifth grade, I taught fifth grade for a little while, and I would always wear crazy socks, and my students were like, Dr. Allen, we just don't understand why you wear those crazy socks. And they all had meaning, they all had stories. And so if I refer to socks, you'll just have to forgive me today, but they all do have a lot of meaning. So, okay, the title today is Unbinding the Soul and Finding Meaning After Religious Hurt. And that's really what we're going to spend a lot of our time talking about, is this finding meaning. If you were with me last time, we talked about religious hurt. We'll review some of that, but really we're going to, it's kind of part two, right? This is where we were before, understanding religious hurt. And then now we're going to see finding meaning after religious hurt. So it's kind of the two-step process here. I want to acknowledge each of you for your time today, and for Aaron and for Utah State University inviting me, and especially the Transforming Communities Institute. I really appreciate being with you today. So let's take a look. I want to start today by sharing a grounding exercise. And we did this last time, only this is a little bit more involved because we have a little more time today. And so what I would like for us to do, there's two steps to it. First, we're going to do a grounding exercise, what I call 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we'll do that. And then we're also going to give you time to go to this Padlet, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So let's first, if you are comfortable where you're sitting, if you can just kind of relax and maybe even close your eyes, if that's comfortable to you, and just kind of listen to the instructions. I want to get us in a place where we can really learn today and grow from each other. And I want you to think of 5 things that are in your space. And you can think about these things if your eyes are closed, or you can actually look at these things that are quietly beautiful and interesting to you. And these may be items in the space that you occupy now, or things that you have seen that you can see in your mind's eye. Think about these 5 things. And as you think about these 5 things, I want you to think of 4 things that you feel. 4 things that you feel, the sensations, maybe the chair, your feet, the air, the room. What do you feel in your body? What do you feel in your emotions today? And then I want you to think or listen to 3 things that you can hear. Listen for those 3 sounds, near or far. It could be my voice. It could be a hum of a machine. It could be many different things. Sounds near or far. And then 2 things that you notice. Notice 2 things about yourself in this moment: the breath, the pressure, your curiosity, your anxiousness, the emotions that you feel. And then finally, last is the wonder, is bring one thing to mind that brings awe into your life. Maybe it's nature, maybe it's kindness, music, silence, memory. And this exercise really puts us in a place where we can begin to learn and grow. We're trying to remove our daily distractions and really come to this meeting today prepared to learn. So I have the next part of this exercise is I have a QR code that takes you to a Padlet. And this Padlet, you can use your phones to access it. You may have to create a quick account. Um, but if you would like, and we'll take a little bit of time to do this, I would like for you to follow this Padlet, and it's something I've been doing now for about the past year. And it's creating a community of awe, and we post pictures and thoughts on this map of the world. And it's a really a fun way to kind of connect with community. So as you look at that, and I think what I'll do is I'll bring up a different screen here so that you can see the Padlet if you're not available, if you're unable to see it. So let me see. Let me go back here. So here is our Padlet, and hopefully you're able to see this. And all of these pin drops are places where people have posted pictures or thoughts or ideas about awe and the experience of being human. And so you can see we have a place here in Seville, right? This is awe can also be found in architecture in the Seville Cathedral. I was there last summer. I posted this one, and it was an incredible thing. We have people from Lincoln, Nebraska, who posted this beautiful picture, and this is what brings them awe. And it says, "My garden brings me joy and awe. I love watching the bees and the butterflies every day." Here's one from Las Cruces, New Mexico. This is on the sand, the White Sands. I've been to White Sands, and it was a lot of fun. But this is a beautiful picture that was posted 2 months ago. Here's a thought from South Africa. No picture, but it says, "I saw the Milky Way for the first time to the sound of hyenas." I thought that was really powerful that this person posted that. So why don't you take a couple minutes to play around with that, and maybe you can start posting. And as we go through the lecture today, maybe something will come to your mind. Wow, I should really post this, or I have a great story about this place or something. And you can take your time with doing that. But I'll give you a couple minutes to look at that. Here's a great shot. This is in Messejana, Portugal. My family and I spent about 3, 4 weeks in Messejana this past summer. We were selected as artists in residence at a art place, part of a community art residency, and we did a whole entire art installation on the power of awe and dark skies. And we brought people in from the village, and we created ceramic pieces. We did digital media. We did music and dance. We did all kinds of wild things. But this was a really fun thing that brought a lot of awe and a lot of inspiration to us. And it brought a lot of meaning. So I would just encourage you to use this, and I look forward to seeing your posts as we go throughout today's seminar. Okay, let's go back to this, and we will share it again here. Let's see, present full screen. There we go. Okay. And, oops, giving me some trouble there. Okay, 1 second. We're gonna redo this here. I learned with technology, you have to be patient. And if you rush it, then the gremlins really like to come out. There we go. All right. So let's kind of dig into our lecture today. And let's start by a little bit about me, just a quick introduction. So I retired as a
Hey
U.S. Army.
Troy, sorry to interrupt you. We see like a little box that says audience window.
Yep, you sure do. There we go. How's
There we
that?
go. Thanks.
Thank you. So I retired as a U.S. Army clinical chaplain back about 5 years ago. And I specialized in my chaplaincy in trauma, in moral injury, and spiritual crisis. And I spent most of my time in hospitals, in trauma centers, in spiritual life centers, And I supported service members and their families through really war-related trauma, identity collapse, and religious wounding. And now I was hired by Utah State University to be a professor focusing on rural mental health and awe and meaning making. And I'm deeply familiar with the spiritual development or the spiritual, yeah, spiritual development and spiritual injury. Personally, I've experienced a faith transition myself after years in high demand religious environments with trauma. And I've spent an entire career sitting with people at their breaking points, soldiers in war zones, families facing unbearable losses, individuals wrestling with questions. And I served for over 20 years as a chaplain, where trauma was not theoretical. And I want you to realize that that's an important part of who I am, that trauma was not something that I experienced in a book. Trauma was not something I've read about. It was not theoretical. Trauma has a name, it has a face, and it has a heartbeat. And those of you who are in your personal practice now, you can relate to that because this is no longer theoretical that we're speaking about. Along the way, I really began to see something quietly present in many of the conversations that I had. It was the wounds that do not come from combat or catastrophe, but from a belief system that somehow has let them down or supposed to give hope that has not given hope. From communities that once felt like home, from doctrines that shaped a sense of self, I started to see the challenges and the struggle of this. And so I witnessed spiritual journey. You know, I've witnessed war. I've been in war. I've been in rural communities. I've been in big cities. I've sat with families. I've sat with individuals. And again, in my own life. And so today's topic is personal for me. Not because I wrote a paper on it or, because I lecture on it, but because I've lived it. And that's what brings a lot of passion from me to this subject. So what I have witnessed in my career has really changed and shaped me. And I think that goes with you as well. Those of you who are in your private practice or are practicing, it will shape you, right? And you will see how wounds shape other people and they shape us. Shame is one of those most destructive spiritual forces that I have witnessed. And we're going to talk a little bit about shame today and how detrimental it is. The most profound suffering, I believe, often comes from identity fracture. And this identity fracture is I know who I am one day, and the next day I do not know who I am. And many experience spiritual development being shut down or punished or feared, and trauma emerges out of this, right? And so we've talked a little bit about this last time, is that when we leave traditions or when we no longer feel in the midst of a tradition, it often triggers anger and it often triggers this trauma that we've talked about. So why does all of this matter? I think one of the clearest patterns I've seen is that people rarely break because they lost their beliefs. They break because they were not allowed to grow. So I want to open this up for a discussion. And I want you to think about that concept for a second. People rarely break because they lost their beliefs. They break because they were not allowed to grow. I would like to give you the floor for a few minutes. And if you're comfortable, I would love to hear from you what that sounds like to you. Where does that resonate? And so does anybody want to take a shot at this? I would love to hear from you. Again, people rarely break because they lost their beliefs. They break because they were not allowed to grow. Anybody want to tackle that one? And see, this is the place when I'm in a classroom that I lift up my pant leg and show them the funny sock, right? Show them it's okay. It's okay to take a stab at this.
Yeah, I could speak to that.
Great.
So,
Jonathan, is it? Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Thank
I'm
you.
also wearing Mario socks. So,
That's
Yeah, man
it.
of fun socks. But yeah, so like when I was younger, I had some like identity issues, and my parents, my church tried to change that, and it kind of went the other way, right? Like so because I wasn't able to grow as a person because I was kind of like made to be small, I was kind of like constricted, I was wrong, I was shameful. Then I lost the beliefs. So it that made me question it. So it was like the opposite direction.
Yeah, so fascinating, right? So we can see that sometimes this gets turned around, doesn't it? So thanks, Jonathan. That was brave. Thank you. Nice work. Anyone else?
I had a thought.
Okay, who we got here? TJ, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So, not necessarily something that I personally experienced, but I guess just like a observation in nature.
Mhm.
Um, for a long time when I was in high school, we had the house we lived in, we had a big um, walnut tree in our backyard, and we created a sort of like hammock thing that we could hang out on using old fire hose that my dad brought home from some construction job.
Yeah.
And so we put that into the tree and we had a lot of fun hanging on it. It was almost like a little cargo net. Many, many years later, when my parents were moving and sold the house, we were taking apart that from the tree and um, not realizing it until we were taking it out. And I was cutting the hose out. Where the hose was wrapped around the tree was much smaller compared to the other parts because it was constricted and like physically it was not allowed to grow.
I love
And so that memory was something that was initially, yeah, that was the first thing I thought of when you brought up that concept of not being allowed to grow and the effect that it had on that area.
on that tree. Yeah.
Mhm.
TJ, thank you for sharing that. That's a powerful, powerful metaphor. Uh, I think that is so beautifully and well said. Thank you. That really sets a great tone for us to kind of drive through this a little bit. Yeah, we see that in nature that when when we're constricted, when we're not allowed to expand, that trauma can happen, right? And that trauma happened in that tree, in that branch. So it's a beautiful story. Thank you. You can take a look at our objectives today. Those are the things we want to talk about. We're going to describe religious hurt, identify common experiences, etc. So those are there for you to look at. But let's look at this principle because I love metaphor, I love story, and TJ, thank you for sharing that, and Jonathan, thank you for sharing your story. I love story. I'm a trained narrative therapist by my background, but I just love metaphor, and I really love the idea of kintsugi. And my Japanese friends will probably say, "Wow, you really need to practice your Japanese pronunciation," but that's the best I can do. So, um, remember when I showed you this pot earlier, right? This little succulent pot that I had made out in the shop. And where is that? Where is that chip at? There it is. Okay. Very easily I could have been sad about that because I dropped it. Fortunately, it didn't break in half, but it just chipped the bottom. Well, in Kintsugi, we'll talk to you about this uh, idea that for centuries, when a ceramic bowl is broken, the artisan didn't throw it away. I think that's so important to hear that the artisan did not throw it away or even try to hide the cracks. Instead, they repaired it using a lacquer mixed with powdered gold. And I have a few examples of kintsugi on the screen here. The one is a beautiful AI image that I asked AI to create a human being with kintsugi. I thought that was just incredible. But the fractures were not disguised, but they're illuminated, and the broken places became the most beautiful part of the vessel. So, in the philosophy of kintsugi, the history of the bowl, the shattering, the loss, the repair is what makes it valuable. So, the wound becomes the work of art. And in my bowl right here, if I went out to the shop and found that chip, which I did save, I could make that broken part beautiful. I think many people who go through religious trauma, uh, for a time, they may feel like that shattered bowl. And I believe when a belief system breaks or a community fractures and a story collapses, it is devastating. And sometimes in that collapse, people are told implicitly or explicitly that they are ruined, right? That they are damaged or that they're spiritually defective, um, for walking away from this. And even in my own life, being a chaplain for so long and then kind of returning home and not necessarily being part of a religious community at the time, I have been told, wow, you know, how come you're spiritually broken? And I'm like, wow, well, let's talk about that, right? And so, but what if the break itself is not the end? What if the break is not the end? And what if it is the beginning of a different kind of beauty, right? One where the person chooses the gold that fills the cracks. And so their values, their boundaries, their hard won wisdom, their freedom, it reminds us that healing is not returning to what once was. This bowl will never be the same. Okay. It will never be the same. But if I go out in the shop and I fix this with the kintsugi method, it will be a gorgeous piece. So healing is becoming something more integrated, more honest, more luminous because of what we've lived through. Today's training and the journey that people are on is really focused and foundational in this method of kintsugi. So if you will remember that this journey is about broken vessels and how we put them back together. I think that this will really be a great learning experience. So we're gonna watch a quick video because I love videos from Sunday morning and one of my favorite shows. So now this worked with Aaron and I first, so we're gonna try this video for you. Here we go. Oh, you rotten thing. Okay. Let's try it again. There we go.
From Tokyo, Lucy Kraft tells us about an art form that's all about picking up the pieces. No matter how broken the pottery, Tsuyoshi Koishihara says there's nothing he can't fix. After 40 years and nearly 10,000 pieces restored, pottery repairman doesn't really do him justice. Reassembling a tiny sake cup like a 3D jigsaw puzzle, the Kyoto artisan is an expert in kintsugi, ancient technique for making shattered dishes whole again. Kintsugi, literally gold and joint or patch, highlights breaks, chips, and other flaws instead of hiding them. Priceless tea bowls and cheap crockery alike become sublime mementos of personal history. He says, originally, kintsugi allowed a samurai to show contrition for breaking his lord's pottery. To prove the mishap was accidental, not an act of rebellion, simply gluing pottery back together wouldn't do. In a post-samurai, time-starved era, superglue is Koishihara's go-to adhesive, meticulously dropped into hairline cracks to hold shards in place. Lacquer is painted onto the spidery breaks, serving as base coat for the crowning touch. A sprinkling of gold dust that makes seams pop. This is not good as new, but new and improved. Collectors use kintsugi to preserve the monetary value of exquisite pieces, but most of Koishihara's work is fixing beloved but everyday items. A cup is not just a cup, he says. It represents moments of your life, who you shared meals with, who you drank tea with. It's a storehouse of memories. Kintsugi reflects an old Japanese aesthetic which celebrates and finds beauty in imperfection. But in recent years, a new generation of Japanese is rediscovering and reinterpreting a once obscure repair technique. In a Tokyo workshop, artist Tomomi Kamoshita teaches students how to mix and match beach glass and ceramic debris into kintsugi mashup ornaments. You're a potter who specializes in broken pottery. How did that happen?
この中でどうしてもこう
In every batch of pottery out of the kiln, there are always a few rejects, she says. I wanted to salvage them. So now her lemons get a new life. A graft of ceramic or glass like patches on a pair of jeans, a technique known as yobitsugi. With its optimistic message of recovery, kintsugi has taken on a life of its own, far from Japan. There are kintsugi branded sneakers, cigars, and perfume. A kintsugi inspired Star Wars helmet. Not to mention pop songs and self-help tips about bouncing back from adversity, or even healing political partisanship. Around the world, kintsugi is having a moment right now. Why do you think this idea resonates with people?
器だけでなく
It's not just about broken dishes, she says. Life involves getting hurt, but being wounded is a chance to create something completely new, a profound life lesson for us all. Damaged teacup or tortured soul, in the resilient world of kintsugi, nothing is truly breakable.
Okay. A powerful metaphor for today. So powerful. Of course, my favorite part was the Star Wars reference, right? So I had missed that when I watched the movie, I guess, but now I'll never unforget that, right? Okay, so before we talk about repair or unbinding, we need to understand the spiritual development. And this slide is when we think about human spiritual development, we have to think about the lifelong process of making meaning. Okay, and so we have to go back to kind of the root of this, and that's the work of James Fowler, whose work remains the foundational for spiritual development and making meaning. And so, what this means is that when we're spiritually developing, we grow in authenticity, we grow in compassion, and we grow in connection. And we move from the external authority in religious ideology to internal authority. And we integrate identity and values and purpose. And so let's look at this chart here that Dr. Fowler created a long while ago. And it shows the progress of spiritual development. We have to understand this in order to see what happens when we work with folks with spiritual trauma. So first of all, we have the primal and the undifferentiated idea of spiritual development, right? The attachment bonds develop, laying the foundations for trust and meaning making. Then we move into what they're calling the toddler and early childhood years of spiritual development. And really it's about stories and actions and examples of faith in their heroes. And then we move into a school age type of spiritual development where the child begins, or the person begins, to take on stories and actions and examples of faith, and then they start to feel this belonging to a community. We then get into stage 3 of this adolescent idea of spirituality, where we begin to recognize stories and actions, and we internalize. Then we move to 4, which is kind of the early adult idea. It's our personal responsibility, religion, social justice, beliefs, etc. 5, middle adulthood. These are adults. Thinker recognizes multiple perspectives and paradoxes. And then we get to 6, which is quite rare, and that is the universalizing of faith. And that is this non-dualistic approach to life. It sees oneself as part of the whole, regardless of nationality, social class, gender, etc. And it's really hard. But these stages that Dr. Fowler talks about, these aren't like connected to years of your age, right? These are just stages that we all progress through. And so before I show the next slide, let me ask a question. Maybe I should say, do you, and this is often asked of me, but I want to ask you, where do you think that religious trauma or hurt, what stage do you think it often shows itself? Of these Fowler stages, James Fowler stages, what do you think? Anybody want to take a stab at it? Just throw it out there. And remember,
Five,
yes, go ahead.
between 3 and 5.
Between 3 and 5. Okay. Do you have a reason for that?
That's what teens do and adults, and
Oh.
then more challenges.
Yeah, watch out. Yeah, that I think that's right, because we have these teens, right, who are kind of, I have a teenager, right, and then I have a 20-year-old, but they're experiencing, they're growing, they're developing, and so I think that's a really good shot. Yes, absolutely. Between 3 and 5. Anyone else want to take a shot at this?
I'm wondering if it doesn't happen earlier than that.
Oh, okay. Is that Jennifer speaking? Yes.
Yeah, it's Jennifer. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Jennifer,
So,
go ahead. Tell us why you think it could be earlier.
well, when you're saying injury, I guess I would love some clarification on the word injury. What exactly are you mentioning? Because if we're talking about, I mean, if we're talking about when you first notice the cognitive dissonance, I think that adolescents definitely notice the cognitive dissonance, and that they're confused, and developmentally they want to, veer off into their own ways, but they know that that's dangerous spiritually. And so they get confused. And so it's obedience or authenticity. That's where they get confused. But I think it can be earlier than that, because obedience to your family and is earlier than that. Obedience to your parents and obedience to what they're trying to tell you about spirituality is earlier than that. But the problem is that even young children, the ideas and the concepts of spirituality are so abstract. And that's why we've got completely these fantasies and these stories of let's talk about the Bible, and let's talk about Noah's Ark, and let's talk about all these fantastical stories that are tangible, but they sound completely out there, but they're things that you would see almost on TV or things like that, that are so vivid that can capture a child's imagination, so that they can understand this. But this is where we have the injury begin, is that we talk about religion in this fantastical sense, but then we instill this ideology on these children in a literal context. And then the transition between understanding the literal context and the abstract doesn't always make that transition. And so the beginning of injury stems at the very beginning, in my opinion.
I love that. And Jennifer, thank you for that. Because if we go back to, I believe it was TJ who shared about the tree, right? And they put that fire hose around the tree. It was probably a pretty young tree at the time. And then it grew and it couldn't expand. And so it injured the tree, right? So I think, Jennifer, I think you're onto a really good point here, is that this religious trauma or this hurt, right, can start at a very young spiritual development age. And notice we're saying age as in not age with our human bodies, right? But the spiritual development. So very good. This is a great conversation. Let's look at this little chart. I'm going to skip this chart because religious trauma, a lifelong non-linear process. See, when Dr. Fowler stacked those on top of each other, it confused us, right? And when I've studied this, I'm like, oh man, this is not linear. This doesn't just go da 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 da. What it does is it spirals. Spiritual development is a spiral. Meaning making across the lifespan is a spiral. And so we start right at the left-hand side of this, where it says the individuative and the reflective, the questioning and the identity. And we want to get to the top right, which is here. We want to get to this universalizing tendency, the compassion, the justice, the love, right? But all of a sudden, we have this binding. We have this binding that it arrests movement, it punishes questioning, and it goes back and forth, and we're trying and we're spiraling, and it's like, oh, it's so tricky to figure out, right? So what we have to do then is this to restore movement. We have to, and I'm so, TJ, I'm so glad you shared that example with us. We have to cut that. We have to unbind to be able to continue on this spiral movement of spiritual development. I think this chart says it much better than the Fowler chart, even though we're using both. So when systems and religions hurt our development, we get these cracks. And the foundational voices of this, if you're interested in learning more about when religions hurt, we can look at Dr. Janjo Lalek and Dr. Winnell from Bounded Choices and from the Religious Trauma Syndrome. Both of these professors really look at how maybe cults or these really dark kind of religious that brings kind of a dark meaning into people's life, how they hold us down. But what I've experienced is that many times, many different religious injuries and trauma can hold us down. It breaks us, it cracks us, right? So punishes questioning, rewards conformity, equates obedience with worth, pathologizes individuality, and conflates. So we get all of these cracks in our self. And being bound is then the definition of religious trauma is the physical or the emotional or the psychological response to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that an individual experiences as overwhelming or disruptive, leading to lasting adverse effects on their well-being. And so we talked about this last time about the definition, and what it means to be bound by religious trauma is the shame and the fear of punishment, the loss of community, and the identity entanglement. This is where we get a little bit more technical about what's happening to our human being, our person, right? And so religious hurt requires an unbinding. Okay, religious hurt requires an unbinding. And when people come to you for help, that's kind of what they're looking for, is this unbinding. And so they're looking for an unbinding from anxiety and stress, depression, identity crisis, cognitive dissonance. And this one's important, the internal conflict when personal experiences clash with religious teachings. That one there causes a lot of grief. Okay, it causes a lot of grief. And I think as social workers and professionals of helping people, we have to realize that that cognitive dissonance is really, really difficult. It puts a lot of cracks in our bowls, a lot of cracks. It's put a lot of cracks in my bowl, a lot. And so we have to realize that this religious hurt requires an unbinding. Let me ask you, this is a cool slide. I like this one. Remember the cumulative effect. If you were with me last time, the cumulative effect means the gathering of all these things, right? That one little injury is important, but when you start stacking all these things together is when we get the real problem, okay? So I'll just let you look at that. The autonomy is lost, the isolation, and the emotional abuse becomes routine. These are the things that this is kind of the rubber meets the road type of place, right? So you can take a look at that. It's more of a theoretical type of slide. Okay, the ruck march. I love ruck marching. No, not really. I loved ruck marching. I loved backpacking before I joined the Army, and then the Army ruined me from backpacking, right? Because the Army told me, you just throw all this crap in your backpack, and I don't care if you need it, you're just gonna walk. And before, when I was a backpacker, I just took the things that were necessary, right? I just took a little weight as possible. But when I served in the Army, we did a lot of ruck marching, and if you've ever carried a loaded pack for miles, you know that the weight doesn't hit you all at once, right? At first, you barely notice the weight. I mean, maybe you're like, oh, it's a little heavy, but I'm fine. And your body adjusts and you keep moving. But over time, every added pound starts to matter. And the instructors of our ruck marches, or the leaders, they were always like, no, you can't leave that home. You can't leave that back. We'd start throwing stuff out, when we were in our training marches. We'd be like, I don't need this anymore. And then they'd weigh the stupid packs at the end of the march to make sure you did it right. It was a terrible experience, right? But over time, every pound starts to matter, every piece of weight, and nothing major on its own, like a water bottle. But when you start adding all of this is when it adds up. Now, imagine a person starting their life with an emotional or a spiritual backpack, right? At first, it's empty. They're gaining experience. They're growing. They're learning. And suddenly, life throws them a couple of heavy weights, right? And the stone for every rule, a stone for every criticism, a stone for every moment they were told not to question, a stone for silence, a stone for shame, a stone for isolation, a stone for losing the right to say no. And pretty soon the backpack is bigger than the ruck bags that we were carrying. Individually, none of these weighs enough to break a person, but together they become the full rucksack. And so that's what I want you to think about when an individual comes to you with a spiritual hurt or injury. They are packing a lot of weight. And so I see that same narrative in people who I've worked with, and they've experienced the religious and spiritual trauma. They internalize the message that they are the problem, that the load isn't the problem, but they are the problem. And so that brings us really to this next slide of the experience of binding. So I want to take a second and maybe open up the floor for a minute and say, let's look at this experience of binding. The fear of punishment, the shame, the unworthiness, the loss of community, the moral injury, the generational and cultural expectations. The door can be open from being bind, but the soul can still feel trapped. For you, which one of these, when somebody comes to you, or even in your own life, what do you think, which one weighs the most and why? Just looking at those things, the binding effect, which one has a lot of weight to you? And let's couch it in rural communities. We'll make it even more tricky.
Generational or cultural expectations.
Yeah. Why do you say that, Carissa?
Well, if you'd mentioned, I was gonna say it's different for everybody, but since we said rural communities, because maybe that's a shared experience and very high, it's just the expectation and.
Yes. Yeah. The expectation is very heavy, right? When we are not fulfilling expectations, it can become extremely heavy. Mm-hmm. Who else wants to share? Yeah, there's some here in the chat, right? Loss of community or identity. Yep. Shame and fear of punishment from the community. Yeah. It's really about the loss of community. When we talk about rural mental health, we're talking about when we have this rucksack on and we're throwing things in there, the loss of community can be devastating to people. And so we have to be, I believe, pretty careful about that.
Would you
All
say,
right. Oh, yep, go ahead.
would you say the general expectations would also tie into loss of community? Because if your family's rejecting you, or that's your expectation, wouldn't that go hand in hand?
Yeah, the generalizing or general expectations of what your family should be doing or should look like, that's a pretty powerful trauma. Yes, absolutely. For example, I'm working with a person right now who's kind of going through a spiritual crisis. They're struggling with some things. That crisis is really turning into some trauma, and that trauma extends from, hey, I'm not going to the church's social, whatever church that is, the church's social tonight, and my family's being ostracized because of it. Right? So that is trauma. Okay, that is like I can deal with like not going. I can deal with what people are saying. I can't deal with being ostracized, right? And so that binding is a really difficult thing, especially in rural areas. We have to be very mindful of that. So they have all these cracks, and all of a sudden, one more thing piled on top is enough to do them in. So we have to be aware of that. Other thoughts?
Space for a question.
Yes,
I'm
Chad.
Chad.
Yes.
Hi.
Uh-huh.
You identified rural. It sounds like as you kept talking, it had to do with the social identity of it. I guess I'm curious, is that why you focused on rural versus non-rural and kind of how you define that? Like in my head, I'm thinking, I don't do a lot of rural communities, but I think someone in Hooper might feel like they're rural and someone else in Hooper might not feel rural.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I think Chad, I hear you because when we say rural, it is an identity, right? It is because even if I'm in Salt Lake City, maybe I'm by myself, right? So what does rural mean, right? Well, for me, it means locations that are very limited with sources of access to sources of help or access to different options, right? There may be one church or there where in my other place where it's non-less rural is there's more options, right? And so it's kind of like this shrinking of options. That's how I think of rural. We don't have four different schools to choose from. We have a public school, right? I can't go to a charter school. I can't go to a private school. I have this school. And so really it's a shrinking of this. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes it that the cost of being other gets much
Uh-huh.
higher in that
Yes. Yes.
situation.
And that's kind of what I focus my work on, right? Is this rural identity is like, it's really a tricky place to be. It is. It's dang tricky. And I think we need more people to really focus on it because it is such a difficult thing. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Chad. I appreciate that. Let's any other comments? I didn't check the chat. Let's see. Mm-mm-mm. Let's see. Supporting systems in rural communities have limits. Yeah, there you go. Can feel isolated. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, perfect, you guys. Okay. So before we take we're gonna take a 5-minute stretch break. I really want to get to this because this is the meat right here, right? This is the main dish. This is the main thing we want to talk about is unbinding, right? Because we talked about trauma, we talked about all these things in the past, unbinding and how to unbind. So to you, what does it mean? Let's just take a minute. What does unbinding mean to you? If religious trauma binds us, right, from our growth, from our spiritual development that we talked about from Fowler's development, what might unbinding mean to you? And TJ already gave us the answer, but with his amazing story, what does it mean to you? Unbinding. Somebody give us some example. We can check chat, or you can come online and share. Let's see. Unbinding. Going back to our mindfulness exercise, it's freedom to experience awe. Thank you. I love that. Oh, here's a whole bunch coming in now. Okay. Able to breathe. Yes. Uh-huh. Unbinding. Choice and authenticity. I love that. Thank you. Aaron says, removing those religious expectations. Yeah. Giving us the chance to breathe. Intuition. Good. Growth. Yeah. Self-acceptance and love. All of these things are beautiful, beautiful words. Being able to accept and value self separate from the religious. Yeah. Beautiful. Very good. Unbinding. It begins when we unbind the soul is we are able to tell the truth. We're able to tell the truth. That we're being witnessed without judgment. That we're being witnessed without judgment. That we're claiming our autonomy. There's awe and connection. There's finding new meaning in systems and creating rituals of release and renewal. Choosing the gold begins the repair. And I believe that you, as social workers, helpers, right, professionals who help, you are there to help unbind them. I really believe that. And you are there to maybe even offer them the chance to begin healing. Okay, the 3 stages of unbinding. I want to take a 5-minute break. Is that okay? Can we do that, or should we just keep going? What do you think? Should we take 5? Okay, let's take 5 minutes and just kind of decompress for a second. And then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about the 3 stages of unbinding and how that works. Okay, so let's give you 5 minutes and then we will come right back. We'll come back together, give you a couple seconds here to come back to us. I think it's important to take a little Zoom break, right? All right. Thank you for those of you who have your cameras on. It's really fun to see you. Thank you. Karina, nice smiling face there. Thank you. Marilyn, she's out for a walk, it looks like. I love it. It's fun, you know, when I do my workouts, I do echelon fitness, and I love when the instructor shouts my name out. So I think it's so fun. So I've tried to pick a few people here. Tammy, nice to meet all you guys. That's great. Okay. Who else? Jessica, yeah. Jeffrey, Brittany, all you guys, thank you so much. Okay, man, I'll tell you, I put this I put this together thinking that I didn't have enough information. It looks like I have enough for like a 5-day course, so I think we're good. we're not going to run out of things to talk about today. All right, let's get into this because I really want to talk about the power and the emotion of awe because that's what I'm really passionate about. So we'll get there. So let's talk about now the 3 stages of unbinding. That is naming, releasing, and repairing. Okay. And again, this comes from my framework in narrative therapy, but we're kind of couching it in a way that we can all really understand it, whatever framework you use. So first of all, we want to name, right? We want to use the symbol of this cage as the naming, right? We want to name the cage. We want to understand the weight in our pack. And we want to externalize the problem for the folks that come to us, right? It's the movement from, say, I am broken to I was shaped by something that harmed me, right? Naming separates identity from the experience. And so we really want to recognize the cage in the binding. Naming separates identity from experience. It pulls the shame out of the self and it places it where it belongs. When someone names religious trauma or coercion or the fear that has controlled them, they aren't being dramatic. They are beginning the process of reclaiming their life. And naming often happens quietly, internally, before a word is ever spoken. And sometimes it's the whisper, I don't think this belief or this idea fits me anymore. So I want you to listen carefully for when a person comes to you for help and they are whispering, I don't think this belief or this idea fits me anymore. This fear isn't coming from God, they may say, it's coming from a system. Some of these things that I've heard before. Naming is the first act of courage. It's saying this pack is weighing me down. Okay. And so the moment the backpack finally feels heavy, that's the place where they come. Okay. And so this is naming. It is not healing. This is not the healing. This is not the putting it back together with the gold, right? But this is the naming. It's the declaration. Okay. So let's look at the next one. So that's naming. Here is releasing, letting go of what no longer holds truth. Notice the bird now, right? It's flying out of the cage. Let's go. It's letting go of the parts of the story that's binding the soul. It's that idea of cutting the rope that's holding that tree branch from growing. It's the releasing. Releasing, I think, is probably the most emotionally complex part of the journey, because it requires both courage and grief. Think about that for a second. It requires both courage and grief. This is where old narratives change. Okay, this is where we start to reauthor the story. Shame is recognized as something inherited and not deserved. And in narrative counseling, this stage of deconstruction and reauthoring, it's the moment someone begins to say, maybe that wasn't what I heard. Maybe that was something else. Okay, so it's an emotional release. It's letting go of a fear-based narrative. It's setting boundaries with people and systems. That one's huge, right? Challenging inherited beliefs, allowing ambiguity, and reclaiming that internal moral compass. So the symbol we're used for this is the bird stepping out of the cage. But it's still trembling, isn't it? Because this is not the healing part. This is the releasing. And so the next part comes is the repairing. Okay, the cracks become gold. Meaning is reconstructed. Okay, it is the identity becomes integrated. Connections are rediscovered. Awe replaces fear. Nature, art, story, community rebuild trust, and spirituality becomes freedom and not control. This is gold. Okay, how do we get there though? How do we get there? The kintsugi bowl not restored to its original form. I think we have to remember that. How do we get there? We're not putting the bowl back together in its original form, are we? We're not putting the person back to the original form. We're making it more whole through intentional repair and, in my background, in reauthoring the story, reauthoring the narrative. Okay, the three stages again are naming, releasing, and repairing. Naming, releasing, and repairing. These are not linear. Here we go back to the circle thing again, right? They're not one step, one step, one step, because sometimes releasing comes back to the naming, and sometimes we can repair during the naming. So we just have to remember these three things and the symbols, right? The cage, the bird, and the bowl. The cage, the bird, and the bowl. People move back and forth between these, okay? But together, all of these three things, they form the narrative arc, and that's what I've kind of put here in the slide, is that they form the narrative arc of the unbinding and the journey from constraint to freedom, from shame to meaning, from fractured to gold. So I think we have time. I want to do a quick breakout session, five minutes. Aaron, I think that will be good. I want you to discuss for about 5 minutes in these little small groups we're going to put you in, is where do you see binding showing up with the people that you work with? And what does unbinding begin to look for them? That's the only question I want you to think about. Again, where do you see binding showing up in people that you work with? Okay, so Aaron's going to put us in small groups, and then we're going to think about binding and how it shows up, and then also think about the unbinding if we have a chance. 5 minutes. Okay, Aaron, go ahead. Okay, everybody's coming back. I was just telling Aaron before we ended the group meetings that it's amazing how fast time goes sometimes in Zoom conferences, and sometimes it goes so slow, but today is going by really fast. Okay, are we all back? I think so. Okay.
About 8 more seconds.
8 more seconds. Okay. Then it will push everyone back to us. Great.
Everyone should be coming back right now.
Great. All right. So welcome back. And let's go ahead and because of time, let's have 2 people share what they discussed in their breakout room. So I don't know how many are out there, but who would like to share? Melissa, would you like to share? No, I only say that because you're like right next to me on my on my
Well, we just talked about how it's interesting to have this perspective that many of us hadn't thought about this before. It's this new way of looking at it. Maybe it's not new. I don't know, but it's kind of a framework that is interesting and something to be considered. I think during the time we were there, we were kind of quiet because we're kind of processing a lot about this idea. And I think we all know people that or clients or friends or whatever that are in this situation. And so it's just an interesting framework.
I think you're absolutely right, Melissa. I think that it's almost an overpowering type of thing, right? It's like this, oh my gosh, this is so heavy. And that's kind of why we started with that grounding exercise, because we often do know people that are in the trenches, even maybe ourselves, right? Yeah.
Right.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for calling me out. That was really fun.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we'll do one more. How about Marcus? You're close to me on my Zoom screen. Can you chime in?
I could, but I don't know that oh, sorry. I guess like I said to the group, I think I'm still trying to get a better understanding um of binding. I think it's very simple but yet so complex. But I mean one of the things that was talked about is like the metaphor of like a bicycle and like the power and the JC can probably explain it a little bit better, so I'm not trying to put him on the spot, but I think he can better explain it than I could. So do you want to take over for that one?
Yeah, sure, Marcos. We talked.
Passing it to you.
Yeah,
Okay.
Troy, you like metaphors. So the idea of if you've ever been on a bicycle where the gears are stuck, the chain gets stuck, and then all of a sudden there's enough pressure that it releases.
Ooh, yeah, that's right.
And so there's all of a sudden all of this energy, but it's not organized energy. And so as we come into new identities and new stories, we can flounder and the pedal can come around and hit us in the shin and cause a different kind of pain. But it's that just release of energy that is, I think, what the unbinding was, what we were kind of talking about.
Absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Jeff. That's great. Gosh, there's so many rich metaphors, I think, as we go throughout this. And I loved what Melissa said, and Jeff and Marcos, you guys, thank you for sharing. Thank you so much. Because of time, we're gonna go quick, okay? And so when we unbind the soul, there is a lot of energy. And I love that metaphor of the bike chain slipping because I'm a mountain biker and man, it hurts, right? But what can we do with that energy? Well, I want to share that the power and the emotion of awe is sometimes a way that we can use that energy to heal us, to put the gold into the cracks. In my research recently on my work with dark skies and the power of dark skies and awe, we've seen something remarkable. And that's when people look at truly dark skies and feel a sense of awe, when the Milky Way stretches overhead and when the air cools and everything goes quiet, something inside of them shifts and you can watch it happen. Their shoulders drop, the breath slows, the jaw releases, and people soften. And it's this like remaking, it's like this reauthoring of their story, even if their story doesn't need much reauthoring. And almost every time they say something like this, I feel so small. I feel connected. I feel calm. I forget what this has felt like. And that experience, that moment of expansion within the emotion of awe, is what we call reframing and feeling that emotion of awe. And awe is not just poetic, okay? It's not just a nice moment outdoors where you're like, oh, I'm so blown away. But awe is a measurable emotional state with profound psychological and spiritual effects. And interestingly, awe shows up in many of the same places that religious hurt shows up. And I want you to think about that for a second. That awe shows up in places that religious hurt shows up. Both involve meaning, both involve identity, both involve belonging and the sense of one's place in this world. But awe works in the opposite direction of binding. Binding constricts, awe expands. And so, because we're getting close to time, I want you to think about ways that awe can help your clients expand. Okay. And where do we find awe? We can find it in nature, of course, in music and art and acts of kindness, in birth and caregiving, in stories. Okay. So these are just some ideas where awe, but let me show you how to put awe into practice in the unbinding. Um, Awe counteracts fear. It counteracts shame, and the constriction often seen in religious hurt. Awe expands perspective and opens spaces for meaning. And here are some things that we can do. In stage one, awe in the naming. Okay, we can say things like, tell me about a moment that took your breath away. Who were you in that moment? What part of you felt free? In the stage two, awe in the releasing. Micro awe grounding practices, music and nature, imagery, guided reflection. What feels possible when you experience awe? How does how does fear change in awe's presence? So we can ask them these little prompts, these ideas of awe within the realm of healing. Here is the repairing. Here's some prompts for you. What values show up in awe? What story does the awe-filled version of you want to tell? I really love that one. And what gold are you discovering in your cracks? Be culturally sensitive, right? Awe is accessible, it's familiar, and it's non-threatening. Okay? It works across belief systems. And that's the thing that really interests me about awe and healing from religious trauma, is that awe works across all belief systems. Nature-based awe is especially resonant in rural communities. When I was asked to create programs for rural residents with their mental health, I had no budget. But guess what? I had ample supply of natural beauty. And so that's what I work with, is the natural beauty awe to help people recover, and not just from spiritual trauma, but from trauma in general. So here's some practical tools for you. Here's some more culturally sensitive awe with a rural focus. And I want to read this to you. When used intentionally within this system that I've broken apart for you today in this framework, awe becomes culturally sensitive intervention that meets clients right where they are, in the landscapes, in their stories, and in the rhythms they know best. And that's really what this unbinding can do, and as we use awe in our systems. So here's our final takeaways. Religious hurt equals emotional wounds and a meaning crisis. Okay, we talked more about this last time, but faith-related trauma binds the self through shame, fear, loss, autonomy, and identifying construction. Remember the backpack, all of those things. Binding can be unbound. That's the hopefulness in this. Healing unfolds through naming, remember, releasing, and repairing. The bowl. That's what we have to think about. The narrative therapy plus the awe, right? The pathways to authoring. Awe widens our perspective. It softens the shame, and it creates space for new narratives. Rural communities hold deep stories of awe. The natural, the silence, the skies, the landscapes. And you, as the professional helper, are part of the unbinding, and you are part of what the craftsman is putting back together. Offer them this gold. Offer them this way to reshape not the old person, but the new. I want to leave you with this kind of prayer today. And it says, as you leave today, may you carry one small moment of awe with you, a memory of wonder, a moment of unexpected kindness, something that has softened you, even briefly. May it remind you that the cracks are not failures. The cracks and chips are not failures. They are the openings. They are the places where gold begins to gather. And may you also offer these moments to the people you serve, not as answers, but as doorways back to themselves. Sometimes healing begins with a single moment of wonder. Here are free resources for you that I put together. Lots and lots of things that you can look at to gain more understanding, and where I drew a lot of these ideas. Here are a whole bunch of QR codes for you. I have my Substack that I write on regularly, that I'm actually doing a new essay tonight. Hopefully it'll be published. Today's presentation, the paper on losing faith, and awe in communities. And you're welcome to any of this information. So I'll leave that up. Again, thank you for your kindness. Thank you for doing what you do, for being a craftsperson, in working with the pottery that we do not throw away. I'm so grateful for each of you for your professional work, and may you continue to heal people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Troy. This has been wonderful. So much great information. Everyone, I put the link in the chat for the post-session survey in order to get your CE certificate. I will also be sending out an email after this, and I will also link in that email, I'll link to Troy's previous presentation if you want to go back and review that one, because there's also a great wealth of information. And yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Troy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And with that, we'll go ahead and end. Everyone have a good day. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.